Hey, it's Ron McLean. Welcome to Hockey Talk on the Rock.
With Laura and Keith.
It's interesting.
So let's back up a second.
He played absolutely out of his mind.
It made no sense to me.
And now, here are your hosts.
Here we go. Episode 49, Hockey Talk on the Rock. We are back, and it is Sunday, August the 8th, all day long on Salt Spring Island. We're going to talk about some off-season news, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to also kind of like throw some judgment at some teams on who we think did good and did bad so far. And there's been a lot of trades, so I think we're going to get right on into it. And as always, I've got number one is the Canucks news.
Yeah, there's lots of that.
There's lots of Canucks news. So do you want to hit the ground running, or do you want to go fine point by fine point here?
Let's go fine point by fine point.
Okay, I think the biggest news one, for whatever reason, was Edler's farewell to LA. He went to Los Angeles on a one-year deal, $3.5 million. I don't think the Canucks probably came anywhere near that type of money for him.
I think they probably were willing to do 3, from what I heard, but I think it was pretty mutual that Edler wanted something different, and the Canucks also wanted to move on from him.
Yeah.
So, like, it's on one hand, it's kind of sad because it is like the end of the 2011 run era, and Edler, I think I've said this on here before, I think you can argue pretty easily is the best defenseman the Canucks have ever had, which might be saying something about the Canucks defense, but I mean, all respect to him, he had a really long career in Vancouver and he did a lot of good things, but I personally think that this is the right move, and I hope he has success in LA, and maybe they use him less there, like kind of more shelter his minutes, because I think Vancouver did tend to overplay him even when he was getting up there in age, and
it's it'll be interesting and different to see him in a different uniform next year, that's for sure, because he is one of the longest tenured Canucks, and sounds like he didn't like last year a lot. He didn't have a lot of fun, it doesn't sound like, and that played a big role. And he sounds like he probably did a lot of homework too, talking to other guys about moving on. I imagine in my head that he, being Swedish, he probably talked to like Matt Sundin and his move from Toronto to Vancouver at the end, and if it was like that big of a deal. Some people were surprised that he didn't pick more of a contender to go to. And Me too. I'm in that boat.
I think I agree with that, but then I guess he played his whole career on the West Coast. He's comfortable. LA must have pitched to him either that you're going to be like in a mentorship role or that they're closer to turning it around. I mean, we can talk about this later, but the Pacific Division itself is so open that LA might think of themselves as being a team that could sneak in for a playoff run here. I don't know if I see it yet, but it's so wide open that who knows, and maybe they sold him on that idea. So
yeah, I'll cover that later because I have LA under one of my upcoming topics, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Because the Pacific is wide open, like you say. But I think we can move on to the next news, and I think like the next biggest one was like the big signing of Garland for 5 years at just under $5 million per, which I think a lot of people think is a fairly good deal, maybe a little high considering he hasn't played a ton of NHL games.
Absolutely love it.
But I like it. Yeah. It's a great deal, I think. Especially
for what people went for like in free agency. I really like Garland's deal, and like, anytime you sign someone and you're like, okay, they have the capacity to play over this deal, like, it's good, right? So I'm really excited to watch Garland play in Vancouver, and I really hope that it's not like a Louis Eriksson signing, which, I mean, is kind of the last time they signed, like, a big-name free agent forward, right?
Yeah.
But I think Garland's, he's 25. You're signing him until he's 30. It's pretty low risk, and hopefully he grows with the team and gets a good opportunity to play, probably with Horvat, I would assume, but who knows, maybe he'll be up with PD for a bit, and
currently as it stands on paper, it seems like he should be able to produce over that contract, which would be really good for them.
Yes.
More re-signings, even though that was like only a re-signing because they just acquired him or whatever, but they did re-sign Brandon Sutter to be their fourth line center and Travis Hamnick to be one of their shutdown defense. And I like the Hamonic one more because I think his role is way more valuable. But like for the money they got Sutter to come back for that role, I think it's good.
It's funny, right? Because like I feel like Canucks fans were united for like the past 5 years in hating Brandon Sutter, but it was mainly because of his contract.
Mm-hmm.
And now everyone again is united in loving that contract for the $1 million. I think. Like, they were talking about it on the radio and stuff, right, about how the Canucks needed, like, a right-hand center. They all had all lefties, and for that price point, you weren't going to get anyone better than Sutter to fill in as a fourth-line center, and if that is what he is, as long as you're not making him play higher up in your lineup, I think it's great. And I agree with you. I personally preferred the Hamonic signing. I really liked him playing with Hughes, especially, but I really liked his fit in Vancouver, but I know a lot of people don't like the money that they gave Hamonic. But I also think that part of the reason why it might be seen as a little bit high, even though I actually don't think it is that high, judging by what other defensemen went for, is because he took a deal this year to come to Vancouver.
Yeah, he did take a very cheap deal, and I mean, to me, I like it because he, to me, is very, very similar to Chris Tanev, and when you think that he got 4.5 and Hamonic took less years than 3,
yeah,
I got no problem with the money on that one.
Yeah, and Green evidently really likes him, so it's another kind of good fit for the team and the coach, and, you know, he's not going to hopefully go through that period of adjusting to the system and everything that happened in January and then getting hurt. So I think Canucks fans will be happier with him this year than they were last year.
Yeah, me too. I agree. I think he'll fit in because he's used to it.
Yeah.
Familiar surroundings. And then the final point I've got for Canucks news is a multitude of signings where they really just kind of filled out the depth of their team and some AHL stuff. But I mean, specifically, like they signed Jarl Halak as the backup, Tucker Pullman as a depth D-man, Nick Patan, Luke Shen, Brad Hunt, Phil DiGiuseppe. So like I kind of really like what they did, to be honest, in terms of all that depth that they did. How much impact it has in the NHL, we'll see.
Yeah, the only one that I'm like meh about is the Tucker Pullman one, right? Like just because it was 4 years at 2.5, which I was like, well, that's a bit high for him. But you know, betting, he's had his issues with free agent signings, and if that's the person he's going to overpay, I don't think it's the end of the world. It comes down to being like 3% of your cap or something like.
Yeah. And I mean, I will put it out there that like with that one, I hated it to start too, but like the more I realized how few right-hand defense were available and how like where Pullman sat amongst them in terms of rankings, he probably did have to give him an extra year or two at that money or whatever, but like if you really need that role, like that right-handed, right-shot defense or whatever, sometimes you got to do it, I guess.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's the end of the world. Like, in terms of the contracts that they just got rid of, I don't think that Pullman compares to those.
Yeah.
And, like, speaking of kind of the rest of them, I guess, I think it's nice that since they moved their farm team to Abbotsford, they look like they're really trying to put, like, a competitive team together. Kind of because it's so close to Vancouver, they know that their fans are going to be paying more attention to the team. Some people will be going to those games, but also if you need a call-up, like Nick Patan, for example, could come in and fill in like as a fourth-line player for a few games. It's possible. So you have a lot more organizational depth, and that's great to see, and it's great to see them spending money because, you know, they could have sat back and been like, no, we're still staying pat, but obviously, Benning needed to make his move. He knows this is his last chance. If they don't win a round, he's probably gone. So he's putting his stamp for the team now, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I did hear on the radio, too, they talked about how because the team moves so much closer, free agents actually now, like, before it was a knock against them to sign with their team if they knew they were going to be on the farm, because they knew the logistics of how far it would take to get there, that the odds of them actually getting called up and being able to play were way lower.
Yeah.
And now the logistics of how close it is, they see it as like it's so close to the parent city.
Yeah.
It plays that kind of factor to bring in some of these guys for depth. So
yeah,
kind of neat that worked out for them. And it was an overdue move, I think. But anyways, that's another thing. Do you have any other Canucks that I missed from?
No, I mean I am gonna come back to them in a bit.
Okay.
This is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but not really.
I've got them in a future bit here as well.
So we'll come back to them when we get there.
Okay. The next thing I had was I think we should rip through a quick little trade winners and participant ribbons.
Sure.
Because I have 11 trades.
Okay. Yeah.
I eliminated a couple of the minor ones, but and I started with the Fleury to Chicago because I think we hadn't covered that one yet, had we?
We did, and at that point in time, we weren't like I wasn't sure if Fleury was gonna play, and I was like neither of them win, but obviously Chicago wins now.
Okay, yeah, Chicago wins now.
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing. Fleury is gonna play, and we didn't know that yet. Okay.
Yeah.
So that'll be big for Chicago, even though I'm going to talk about them again.
Yeah.
Because they're totally weird. So I guess the first real new trade was Seattle's one of their many crafty moves. Was to trade. They drafted McDermott, I think, from LA in the expansion draft.
Yeah. And
flipped him to Colorado for a 4th in 2023. I gave the win to Colorado because they got a depth D-man for like a 4th.
Yeah, and they were talking about this too a bit on the radio. Like one of the problems that Colorado had this year in the playoffs was that they had too many like inexperienced defensemen on their back end, and they wanted to address that with like having a bit more toughness, and McDermott should be able to do that. So I think good move for them, though I'm not 100% sold on Colorado, to be honest, right now.
No.
Either, but yeah.
The next one we had, I don't think we talked about the Schmidt trade. Did we talk about the Schmidt trade?
Yeah, I think we actually did.
Did we?
I think we both gave the win to Winnipeg.
Okay. See, the order was funny. Anyways, Tyler Johnson and a 2nd from Tampa to Chicago for Seabrook's LTI contract.
I mean, this is tempting to give the win to Tampa.
For the cap space.
Which I know everyone loves. Especially, if they need to use that LTIR money. But, I mean, I feel like Tyler Johnson could still be useful, and the 2nd's pretty nice. I'll give the win to Chicago, but Tampa had to do it.
I gave the win to Chicago. Yeah. They got a 2nd rounder, and Johnson, like you say, he could be a decent 3rd-line center for them if they've got Doc and...
If Taves is alive and playing, we don't know yet.
Yeah. Chicago's the next one as well, where they traded Zadorov to Calgary for a 3rd-round pick next year. I gave the win to Calgary just because it was only a 3rd-rounder for a D-man. And
again, the price for defensemen was just crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd give the win to Calgary there, though I'm not 100% sold on Zadorov either. I feel like his defensive game isn't ideal, and he's got toughness, but I don't know. It's kind of like a Gabranson 2.0 kind of thing.
He didn't work in Colorado, didn't work in Chicago, but, I don't know.
But maybe he turns it around in Calgary. I'll give them the win. The 3rd wasn't bad to give up, so.
Yeah, me too. Next, their cross-province rivals traded Ethan Bear to Carolina for Warren Fogle, who I guess wanted out of Carolina.
Yeah.
So this one, I gave the win to Carolina because I think Bear's decent. And they lost Bean and Hamilton this offseason. And Fogle to Edmonton, I don't know why Edmonton's traded Bear away. I feel like they needed a D-man like him more than they needed Fogle, but...
Yeah, I'll get to Edmonton in a bit. That is a big spoiler. I also don't really like what Carolina did this offseason, but that move, I think, was smart for them. And I think that Bear will probably... fill in at least the Jake Bean role in Carolina.
Yeah.
And hopefully it works out for him. I think he's a pretty cool dude, so I'll give the win to Carolina. I honestly haven't watched Warren Fogle play that much hockey, but I don't think he's going to have this humongous impact on the Oilers.
I can't see that either.
So I don't know, I don't know what Edmonton's doing at all.
I don't either. Next one, Ottawa got rid of Dadonov and his 2 years and $5 million left to Vegas for Nick Holden and a 3rd-rounder next year.
It's got to be Ottawa, right?
It's got to be Ottawa. I mean, I think they got a depth D-man and a 3rd-rounder for a guy that just, totally underperformed and had 2 more years left, and, they got out from that contract.
Yeah, and, I don't know what Vegas is doing either. They're another team that just seems to be all over the place right now, and...
Well, they knew they needed more scoring, and I guess Dadonov got a lot of goals in Florida, but he had really good centermen there, and Vegas don't have centermen, so
maybe it works out for him. Maybe he bounces back, and then that deal looks like a steal for them. But right now, it's got to be Ottawa.
The next one was cap dump. New Jersey got nothing, I guess, futures for Will Butcher and a 5th to Buffalo, and I just gave the win to Buffalo because they actually got something. And Butcher's like a decent PP guy.
I mean, I assume they had to get rid of his contract to sign Hamilton, right? That's the reason, but that makes sense. I give the win to Buffalo, too.
The next one I give the win to Boston when they got a 3rd rounder next year from Calgary for Dan Vladar, the goalie. I think that's how to say the last name.
Vladar,
so I based that win to Boston based on I thought Calgary paid a 3rd for like a guy that doesn't have very many games under his belt.
Yeah, I agree. I think like Calgary needed a backup for Markstrom, right? And he played pretty good for Boston, but I think probably a 3rd is too high to pay. I agree.
The next one, I like this one actually. Seattle traded Vitek Vanacek back to Washington for a second rounder in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Washington, maybe, but maybe Seattle. The reason why I went to Washington first is, like, they needed their goalie. And originally speaking, like, to keep your player or whatever, Seattle was asking for, like, a 1st and a 3rd. So to drop it down to a 2nd in a couple years is probably a win. And you know that Vanacek works for your team, like, you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
But I don't think a 2nd is a bad return. So
You're torn?
I'm kind of torn on this one.
I was exactly thinking what you said, that I gave the win to Washington because they obviously wanted him back, and if the original price was a 1 and a 3 to protect him, and then they ended up only giving up like a future second to get him back, like it seems like they held out and got the win over Seattle basically because they didn't get what they wanted.
Yeah.
The last one is Ryan Reeves to New York Rangers for a 3rd next year to Vegas.
Okay, I'm giving the win to Vegas, but it's more like this trade I predicted as soon, like the day after that Washington Rangers game. I'm like, they're going to bring in Ryan Reeves next year specifically to bug or fight Wilson. And, like, this is said as a Canucks fan who I feel like we kind of went through this after 2011 and they brought in Cassian. Like, it was like, you need to be tougher. We're going to get all these tough players. And that doesn't work for every team. Like, you can't just force toughness into your lineup, especially since, like, Reeves wasn't even playing for Vegas, like, in the playoffs or anything. But, on the other hand, I also think he did give a lot of identity to that Vegas team. And as we've talked about a lot on this podcast, Vegas just seems to go through all those, you know, kind of... Reeves wasn't one of the original, like, Knights, but he was, like, a big part of their identity and is, like, what is your team? Yeah. So, I give the win to Vegas, but...
I gave the win to New York only because Pittsburgh paid a 1st for Reeves a couple years ago, so the fact they only paid a 3rd.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was funny. I'll cover New York in a little bit here. So next, moving on from the trade thingy we did, is the offseason review, where we're going to touch on who we think. I said top 3 best and top 3 worst, but I've got 4 and some honorable mentions.
Okay.
I don't know if you've got more. But we'll see how that goes, and I think we'll start with the best for the offseason.
Sure.
So you want to go, like, you do your tops, and I'll do my tops, then we can do honorable mentions? Or...
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, good. Lead it off.
Okay, so I started off with a surprising team to be in the winners of anything, I feel like. I went with Arizona. I feel like they've hardcore embraced their rebuild at the right time. And the picks that they've picked up for, you know, taking on bad contracts are all pretty good. They have like 5 second-round picks or something next year now, and it's meant to be a pretty deep draft. They're going to not be a good team, which means they're going to have a pretty good chance at getting Shane Wright, which is also quite good. And I also have kind of a hot take, which is that I think all the Canucks scraps that they picked up, like specifically Roussel and Beagle that only have the year left on their contracts, I think they're going to be able to flip them at the deadline to playoff teams that are like, we need center depth or toughness depth. Because you know there's GMs that are like old school that are going to want that kind of person in the lineup, and that's going to bug me because, again, I feel like the Canucks almost ended that period without too much pain, and then they just got back into cap help. But that's okay, it's for a different time. So that's just kind of my hot take, but I like what Arizona did, and I think that embracing their rebuild right now is probably the right move. And then I put Winnipeg. I really like the Dillon and Schmidt acquisitions for their back end. Like, their forward group was already pretty strong, and I think that the Central might be one of the toughest divisions next year, but Winnipeg's going to be right in the mix of, coming out of that division, I think. So, liked what they did. Another random team that I put on here was Columbus. And honestly, it just comes down to them getting back so much for Jones and then taking that second and flipping it for Jake Bean. I thought that was really smart. I think Columbus is going to be also an interesting team next year because I feel like everything went wrong for that team last year, and maybe with a new coach and like with Elvis kind of being inspired by the Kivleniks thing, like maybe they're going to have a bounce back season that no one saw coming. But again, I doubt it because of the division that they play in, having just talked about it. But I like their moves. So those were kind of like my 3 winners.
Okay.
And then I have a couple runners up, which are actually both of our teams. So the Canucks and the Flyers, and like kind of talking about, I think they're very similar in what they did, in that they made bold moves, which I like for both teams. They both needed them. I don't know if they're all going to work out. And for the Canucks specifically, I can't name them a winner until we know what Pettersson and Hughes are getting. So, like, until those contracts come in, it's just kind of meh for me. And then maybe they'll bump up into being a winner. And, yeah, the Flyers, I think, good for them to make those moves. And then I also put New Jersey. They overpaid for Hamilton, but in kind of seeing what other defensemen got, I was like, it wasn't that bad. And adding Tatar to that, young forward group, I think is okay. And I think overall they're going to be better next year, but I still don't think they're going to be very good. I honestly had a really hard time picking winners. We were talking about this earlier, so...
Yeah, the winners were harder to pick than the losers, I thought.
Yeah.
And then I, had the wild card section on the side.
Yeah.
But we had some overlap.
Okay.
We had a little bit of overlap, so... I had, my 4 winners, and then I had 3 honorable mentions.
Okay.
And one of the teams you mentioned is in my winners, so I'll start off with Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Actually, Vancouver's in there, too.
Okay.
Winnipeg, basically, they only lost Appleton in that expansion draft, and I think he's good as a depth guy, but, I really like that Shoveldayoff has obviously accepted that, they're in their window now.
Yeah.
So he gave up some picks, but he brought in Dillon and Schmidt, like you said.
Yeah.
And re-signed Stastny on a decent deal.
Yeah.
So I think they're, like you said, their defense is going to be good next year, and that was a question last year. Yeah. And they will be...
Definitely better.
They'll be tough, yeah. And Vancouver too. For everything we already talked in the Canucks news, they're obviously trying to bolster their whole team to be a playoff team. And I like what they did. We'll see how it goes long term, but short term, I really like it. And so I think they're a winner. And I had Boston.
Yep.
I liked that they re-signed Hall and Riley on those deals, and then I liked that they added Forber and Nosek and Halla and Foligno and Allmark, Foligno, Hall, and Allmark specifically. Yeah. And I thought the contracts they did, with the re-signings and those guys, they were all...
They were decent.
They were pretty good. So I think Halla could do a decent job filling in for Krejci.
See, that was the one thing that kept me off from putting Boston on the winners list. I was
because they lost Krejci?
I just don't know. I think Krejci is way better than what people give him credit for. And until they fill that second line center, I think that their drop-off might be, more pronounced than we think. However, I also agree with everything you just said.
Well, I think Allmark was a good signing, too, to
I
take
really
over
like
Rask.
Allmark,
because I think Rask is going to...
Probably retire,
and Buffalo's kind of dumb to let Allmark go.
Yeah,
but,
for nothing.
In my head, I kind of envision that second line almost like Vegas, where the wingers are good enough that Halla could be at the center and fill in if Foligno and Hall are good wingers for him.
Yeah, those were great contracts, as you mentioned.
They were, so I had to put Boston there. You don't know, I'm not a big Boston guy. I thought they did good.
Yeah.
And then I put Tampa up there, and I felt cheesy putting Tampa up there. But even though they lost Gord, they freed up some space with Tyler Johnson.
Yeah.
And I liked their depth signings, to be honest. They added Corey Perry, they added Bellemare.
Yeah, I like Bellemare.
They re-signed Point. They added just these guys like Hudon, DuPont, and Bogosian's coming back. They're not big names, but I feel like they're the type of point pieces that'll have them right back in the Final Four or something next year.
I think for them too, because they were able to keep their defense together. Like McDonough hasn't had to leave. I think that's really big for that team too. Like if you can, losing that third line essentially was pretty big for them. That's again the reason why I don't have them on here. But if their depth guys can step up, there's no reason to believe why they can't repeat again, do the three-peat, right? Like, yeah.
So I liked it. I had to put them in there, but it was tough. It was tough to pick the winners, I thought.
Yeah.
And I did put. I'm not going to go over Columbus, New Jersey, because you basically touched on them, like the haul they got for Jones, Bean, Atkinson for Voracek, and even the guy they lost in the expansion draft, they ended up just re-signing in the UFC in the UFA thing. So. Columbus I put up there too, and New Jersey, I think maybe Bernier will be a good tandem goalie.
Yeah, I think they might have overpaid for Bernier. I was thinking about that when I was talking about that, but he probably will do well. I mean, he did well in Detroit, so I feel like he's probably okay playing behind a defense that might not be the tightest. And Blackwood is a really good goalie, so. Who knows?
So, my final quick one for honorable mentions for best is I do like what St. Louis did.
Okay, I put them as a question mark.
Yeah. Well, Hoffman out, Saad in. I like that. I like Saad a little bit better than Hoffman. He might not be as skilled, but Hoffman just seems like he's not a team guy.
Yep.
And then when they traded Blaze for Buchnevich, they needed scoring. I like that move.
I did like the Buchnevich ad.
So I just kind of like what the little tinkering they did. Okay. That's it for me though for the besties.
Do you want to do worst or do you want to do the ones that didn't do enough?
Let's do worst.
Okay.
Let's
do
worst.
You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to whip through this.
Okay.
Mine, hilariously, and I didn't realize until we started talking, focuses around the Pacific Division.
Okay.
So I had, and they're in no order.
Okay. Yeah.
I had Calgary.
Yep.
I said that they have the broken culture we seem to know about.
Yeah.
And they need they've been talking about the splashy trade, change things up. They haven't done it.
Yeah.
They signed Coleman for a crazy contract, 6 years at nearly $5 million. And then they traded a third for the unproven backup that I talked about. And then they traded another third for Zadorov, who isn't fast enough. And Sutter's teams play slow and hard, and I think they need to be faster.
Yeah.
So I don't like what Calgary did. Chicago, I think, has a major identity crisis where they traded way too much for Jones and paid him too much. I think they overpaid for Jake McCabe.
Yeah.
Fleury could help, but I just don't think the team's good enough. And then, then they took Zadorov out, but they brought in Johnson. It's just it seems like the pieces they're moving in and out are real weird, and I don't think they're gonna do well.
No.
Third, I had Edmonton.
Yep.
What's the definition of insanity? When you do the same thing over and over and you expect different results. They re-signed Smith and Barry. They lost Larson, which I think is going to be bigger than everyone realizes so far. Yeah. And they signed Cody Ceci for way too much money in term. They traded Ethan Bear for Fogle, we talked about, which I think seems dumb. They gave Nurse, that made him the 5th highest paid defense in the league.
I don't get that one at all.
And how are they better?
No, I know.
So, I don't think it's going to be a good year.
It's just McDavid, right? It has to come down to McDavid being better, and you saw what happened in the playoffs.
Zach Hyman, too. 1, 2, maybe 3 years, that'll be good, but that's going to hurt.
Yep.
So, Edmonton, I don't know. And then the other Pacific team that I have as my 4th loser is LA. Because, they seemed like they were doing a good job rebuilding with, their old core.
Yeah.
And then they just kind of all of a sudden were well, throw big money in term at Deneau.
Yeah.
And, some big money at Edler. And, now they're all of a sudden, kind of out of cap room.
Yeah.
And they're not quite even done bringing in the guys that are supposed to take over yet. So, I don't really like what LA did.
See, I think that LA is trying to listen to Drew Doughty, who basically said he was pissed off with rebuilding, right? So they're oh, we gotta go all in.
Yeah.
And maybe it works out. They do have a ton of prospects. I'll give LA that, but
I mean, if a couple of them take some big steps this year, it could be great for them. But I don't know.
I don't know the money that they gave to I don't like.
No.
And especially when you have so much upcoming center depth. But who knows?
So I gave only 2 honorable mentions. Okay. Somehow I narrowed it down.
Okay.
But New York Rangers, because I said just because it's so hilarious how they're overcompensating with Goudreau, Blaze, Reeves. I don't think it's gonna work. Seattle, I put them on there too because I just don't know what they do. They didn't take advantage of their power, and it seems like they really blew it. So I just don't really like their whole.
I agree.
And you?
Okay, so we're really similar. So I'll just go through them really fast. There's a couple different ones. So the first one I have is Edmonton. Basically everything you said. I just don't see them being better. The second one is different. I put Carolina. We talked about this. I really don't like what Carolina did. I feel like they had a good goalie, or they had a goalie that worked for them, and they're like, oh, we don't want to pay you $3.5 million, and then they go and they sign Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta, who both have like injury problems. And like, yeah, I think if Anderson is healthy, he might be good, but I don't know if he's better than Nedeljkovic. And then on top of that, they signed Tony DeAngelo, which I was just like, it's low risk. I'll give him that. Yeah. $1 million for 1 year, but it's like, do you want to bring that into your locker room? And then you're losing Hamilton, you're losing Bean, so those are two kind of key defensemen. I do like the Ethan Bear trade, so I'll throw that in there. But I just, Carolina was one of those teams that I always quite enjoyed watching, and I really thought that their window was opening, and then they still haven't signed Svechnikov. Like, I don't know. It seems like they're taking 2 steps backwards, so we'll see. But I didn't like their offseason. I have Vegas in there. I don't think they've addressed their center depth. I still think, like you do, probably that they're going to be a player for Eichel. So if they get him, then depends on what they give up. But maybe that, comes in. The whole Marc-Andre Fleury fiasco puts him in there. And then Dadonov I put with a question mark. Like, I don't think they're any better than they were last year. Yeah. And then I didn't, my kind of first runner-up, which we talked about, we disagree on, I didn't like Montreal's offseason, and part of it is not their fault. I think losing Weber's going to be bigger than they think, and I think that Savard is a replacement, but I don't think he's the same level. I think they're going to miss Deneau after saying LA signed him for too much money, but he was like their key face-off guy in that playoff run, their key shutdown guy. I think they're going to really miss him, and now it's like all on Suzuki and Kotkaniemi to like fill in those shoes as the top 2 centers on the team, and we'll see how it goes. And then I'm not also sure about Hoffman, and I don't like the foot speed of him and Toffoli on the same team. I'm not super sold on, but we'll see. And then my last runner-up was the Rangers, for everything you said. And then actually I put Chicago in there too, but you already touched on them, so yeah.
Well, we agreed on a lot of those things for us, and so that's good. Yeah. I think we'll see.
And Calgary was a runner-up too. Sorry, but you touched on them too.
I did, and it's good news for Vancouver as long as we're right with what we think.
Yeah.
So the next thing I had was like, who hasn't done enough? Because I found I put a ton of teams in that I did not like and wanted to put as like worst. That just hadn't really done anything. Yeah. So I got 6. How many you got?
I have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so
but I probably didn't think of a few.
I'll do 2, and then you do 1, and then I'll do 2, and you do. Like, we'll go through unless we start crossing each other's off.
Sounds good.
So first 2 I had were Anaheim, because I said that they literally didn't add anybody, and they do have a lot of prospects, but like a few of them haven't really been taking the step. Yeah. So I said if all those young guys don't take the step, it's gonna be a long year in Anaheim. And Washington, I said that like all they did was like bring their backup back, and they really haven't done anything. Like they weren't good enough last year.
Yeah, what makes them good enough next year? Yeah.
So those are my first 2.
Okay. I had Colorado as my first one, as we kind of briefly touched on. I think that... I have
Colorado as well.
Yeah. Obviously, like, re-signing Landeskog was big for them, and not giving him as much money as he wanted was smart. But I don't know if overall that team is any deeper, which was, I think, their problem last year.
It was.
I do like Darcy Kemper, I think, over Grubauer, but he gets hurt.
He does get hurt, yeah.
I don't know, and they gave up a lot to get him.
Yeah, I mean, I had, like, they replaced their goalie with Kempner, and that's a gamble. Like, they lost Donskoy and Saad, and, like, they need depth scoring. Yeah. And then they lost, or they traded Graves, but then they added Ryan Murray, so, I mean, like, again, how are they better? They didn't do enough, I don't think.
I don't think so either. So I had them, and then I had St. Louis, but I actually kind of forgot about the Buchnevich trade when I put St. Louis down there, so, I just think with St. Louis, like, they reached, obviously, the top in 2019 when they won the Cup, and then they didn't do enough to really make it so that they're still a threat. Like, when I think of Stanley Cup favorites, I don't think of St. Louis right now. I think there's too many holes on that team. Mm-hmm. And they're not that far off. Like, they could get into that conversation again. So if they made some bold moves, I think it would be kind of cool. But maybe they shouldn't belong on this list because I did forget about the Vucevic trade.
Yeah, I think they'll be a little bit quicker, a little bit better next year.
Yeah.
The next two I said Pittsburgh, because, I mean, like, we both agreed at the end of the year they need to address their goalies, and we kept predicting goalies who were going to go there.
Yeah.
And they didn't do it. So I think they haven't done enough.
I agree.
And Nashville, I said they replaced Pecorine with David Rittich, and then they re-signed Granlund, but they, like, traded Arvidsson.
Yeah.
I feel like they really haven't done enough.
Yeah, they're a weird team, too, because they looked like they were opening up cap space for, like, something big, and then nothing happened. So I don't know if maybe they just struck out, and they were trying to, like, get a big-name free agent. Like, maybe if Landeskog went to free agency, they were going to make a push for him or something. But I don't get what Nashville's doing either. It's true. Yeah, so my next two, I had the Kraken, which you talked about, and I didn't put them as losers because I didn't really feel like they did enough to be a loser. Like, I don't know, I guess, like, the couple signings they did, like the Schwartz signing, I don't know. The Grubauer one, I don't know about either. Like, the Wenberg one. They all seem questionable, right? They're all like, yeah. But they could have done so much more with, like, their picks and everything. So it just feels like they're kind of an incomplete team right now. And I know a lot of people think they're going to, like, be competitive and, you know, make the playoffs in the Pacific because, again, the Pacific is so wide open. And I feel like maybe it's possible, but their defense looks good. I just don't know if any of those forwards can score goals or enough goals.
Totally.
Yeah.
The last one I had, because you covered Colorado, was Minnesota, because I felt like they freed up all that space, similar like you're saying with Nashville with those buyouts, and they really haven't done much with it. Yeah,
and Minnesota could be a disaster if they don't get Kaprizov to come back.
Yeah, exactly. So
we'll see.
I think they're the definition of haven't done enough.
Yeah.
I have like a couple teams that are under like wild cards, but I really don't have anything else specific or concrete that I was looking to talk about. Okay. How about you on yours?
I've got it. That was it.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'll touch on, like, we already touched on Carolina and Seattle. Kind of want to talk about San Jose, because, like, I feel so... I want to talk about them because they're so what's the word? Enigmatic.
Yeah.
Right? Where, like, you know they're old and they're like, their window's kind of closed and, like, their core isn't good enough. But, like, I'm so intrigued that they brought in Aiden Hill and Reimer as their platoon goalies. And, like, I'm intrigued by a few of their signings. I can't remember. I didn't write them down that they made, but they're like depth signings, like Bonino and stuff like that, to like add more to their already old core and like really try to convince themselves that they're in this. And it's fascinating. So I put them as like a wild card because, like you say, the Pacific's kind of open.
Yeah, I thought this year that they were gonna have a shot at making the playoffs in the revamped Pacific. I was like, you know what? I think maybe they just had an off year and players will be better on that team than they were, but I mean, it is hard, right? Because there is like a younger group on that team, like the Thomas Hurdles and the Timo Myers and stuff, that could be fine. You know, they could push and lead that team, but there is still a lot of old guys, especially on the blue line, right?
Yeah, and especially the blue line. Vlasic and Burns and Carlson are all past 30 now, and they're making a ton of money.
I know, so I wouldn't...
It's fascinating.
You know,
they're going to be an interesting one. And if they do make the playoffs, it'll be weird. Because, like, I think they won't make it far just because they're so old that, like, they won't be able to make it. Right? They'll be fatigued.
Yeah.
Anyways, I kind of like what they did, despite the fact I don't believe in them.
Well, I did like that they moved on from Martin Jones, and I think Aiden Hill will be good. I don't know if he'll be good in San Jose. Like, it's one of those things. But he did play again in Arizona. So, you know, maybe.
So segueing into Martin Jones, wild card other team that I'll quickly touch on is my boys in Philly. Yeah. Because I was tempted to put them in the winner, and I know you kind of honorable mentioned them. Yeah. But I don't know if I can because like
of what they gave up.
Well, I really like what they did, and they obviously knew they needed to make a change, and they brought in Yandel, and they brought in Ristolainen, and they brought in Ellis. Yeah. And then they swapped Voracek for Atkinson. Yeah. Brought in Jones as a backup, who I think Jones, no matter what, is going to be better than Elliott. Yeah. So, like, I like it, and I'm very optimistic. I don't know if it's going to work, right?
I feel like it's similar to me with the Canucks, honestly. It's like, yeah, you're excited that they made these moves, but is it the right set of moves?
Yeah, will it work?
Yeah. And I know, like, they were saying that kind of the whipping boys for Philadelphia have now left, like Gostisbehere and Voracek were two of the ones that the fans complained about, and now it's like they're gonna find someone else that they have to complain about. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
You know,
it could work out. It could work out really well because I mean they upgraded. They definitely upgraded a lot of parts of the team. So. Yeah.
Okay, I do have one more for you.
Okay.
In this kind of theme, because I didn't know where to put them, and I thought about them in all kind of three of the options, but, you know, what about the boys in Toronto? Because
I had them in wildcard, and I was like, I don't even...
Like, I feel like, again, they did, like, the goalie swap with Carolina, where they pick up Mrazek,
yeah.
and I don't know if Mrazek is any better than Anderson, if we're talking about that. Again, injury problems and...
They said they wanted to, like, specific someone who had success with a tandem.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
And I also don't totally believe in Jack Campbell either. I know he had a really good season, but I feel like repeating it might be interesting. So their goaltending might have gone worse. I'm intrigued by some of their forward signings. I know they didn't do anything. They lost Hyman, and I do think that will be a bigger deal for them than Edmonton getting him, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
But I think Andre Kasha honestly might be good for the Leafs.
Depends if he gets hit in the head once,
That's
right?
true.
Like,
but they did do a good job with that contract because it's completely variable, right, in the minors.
Yeah. And
then the Nick Ritchie one, I feel like isn't gonna work out, but we'll see. Like, again, these teams that are signing, like Edmonton and Toronto, sign all their big guns, so much money, and then you just gotta go looking in the scrap pile for other people to fill out your team. And the only reason why I think maybe I'm positive about the Leafs this year is because every year that other people have been positive about them, they've, like, you know, broken down, and maybe having less expectations on that core is going to do something for them.
Yeah, it could.
But
I mean, I just didn't have them really on there because, like, you knew their money situation, and like they did some good depth stuff.
Yeah.
But that's all they were gonna do.
Yeah.
And besides swapping out the goalie, I also think too, like, they didn't need to do as much as people think, because like if Tavares didn't get hurt, I think they might have been in the final.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it was unfortunate, and we'll never obviously know, but like if everybody's healthy, I think they didn't have to do as much as people think they need to make the, like, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't really put them in like winner or loser. I think they needed to try to do their best and fill in the fringe with those value things, and go for it again next year.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to watch them, and
I'm excited for the divisions to realign to normal.
Me too.
And I'm excited for hockey to start again in a couple months. But yeah, it's still a little ways away.
Yeah, sadly.
We'll have some news trickling in from here between then and now, and we'll do like our season preview.
Yeah.
And then we'll have plenty of things.
Yeah.
Plenty of things upcoming.
Plenty of things to talk about still.
Always. Okay. Well.
Okay.
This is Laura. I'm Keith. We've been doing it for almost 50 episodes, and we'll do it again soon. So thank you for listening.
Woohoo!